The alien queen's palace stood like a mountain of steel and fire, its towers reaching into the night sky. Inside the grand halls, silence was broken by sudden cries of panic. Guards rushed through the corridors, their armored boots clanging loudly on the floor. Something unthinkable had happened, something that shook the entire empire. Her daughters were missing. The queen had 2 young daughters, fierce and full of life. They were the pride of the empire, the future rulers, and the very heart of their mother. She guarded them with endless care, keeping them inside the most protected chambers of the palace. Yet somehow, in the deep hours of the night, both vanished without a sound. The first guard to notice was trembling when he gave the report. The heavy doors of the princess's room were locked from inside, the windows sealed with energy shields, and no sign of forced entry. But when he stepped inside, the room was empty, the soft beds untouched. It was as if the girls had simply dissolved into thin air. The queen entered the chamber herself, her eyes glowing with rage. She touched the sheets still warm, proving that the girls had been there not long ago. Her heart pounded with fear, though she did not show it. The fiercest ruler in the galaxy could not let her people see weakness. Instead, her roar of anger shook the entire palace. "Find them," she thundered, her voice echoing across the halls. "Turn the empire upside down if you must, but bring me my daughters." Her guards bowed, trembling under her fury, and rushed away to begin the search. In every corner of the capital city, alarms rang. Soldiers marched through the streets, questioning anyone who looked suspicious. Ships lifted off into the night sky, scanning the air with bright beams. The Empire's vast communication network spread the order across planets. No one was to rest until the princesses were found. Rumors began to spread among the people. Some whispered that enemies of the queen had struck, hoping to break her heart before challenging her throne. Others claimed the princesses had been taken by shadowy creatures beyond the stars. Many were too afraid to even speak, for the queen's wrath was legendary. Anyone who failed her would pay with their life. Inside her throne room, the queen paced like a lioness trapped in a cage. Her claws scratched the steel floor as she thought. Her enemies were many. Rival warlords, jealous council members, old, traitors. All could be suspects. But she trusted no one, and that made the list endless. She knew only one thing. Whoever had dared to take her daughters would be torn apart, limb by limb, but in her heart, hidden under her fury, was fear. For she had seen too much death in her lifetime. She had ruled with strength, but her daughters were her only softness, her only light. Without them, even her throne felt cold. Meanwhile, far away from the palace, the night was calm. Stars shone above small towns, unaware of the storm rising in the empire. In one such place, a human traveler slept quietly, his life simple and unnoticed. He had no idea that the greatest queen in the galaxy had just unleashed her fury, and that his fate was about to change forever. The empire searched through the darkness, but the girls remained unseen, and the queen, sitting on her iron throne with eyes burning like fire, swore a vow that made even her strongest generals shiver. "If I must burn every world to find them," she growled, "then so be it." But little did she know the daughters she sought so desperately were not in the hands of her enemies, nor trapped in the claws of monsters. They were much closer to safety than anyone imagined, soon to be found where no one would think to look, on the chest of a simple human, sleeping peacefully through the night. The throne room was no longer silent. Flames from burning torches reflected on the steel walls, and the sound of marching echoed through every corner. The alien queen sat on her massive black throne, her claws gripping the armrests so tightly that the metal bent under her strength. Her golden eyes glowed like fire as generals knelt before her, shaking in fear. "The princesses are gone," she repeated in a cold, sharp voice. "And yet none of you bring me answers." The generals lowered their heads, not daring to speak. One guard tried to explain. "My queen, we searched the palace 3 times. Every corridor, every chamber, every secret tunnel. There is no trace of them. It is as if the air itself swallowed them." The queen rose to her feet. Her tall frame, and powerful armor made her look like a goddess of war. She walked down the steps of her throne with slow, deadly steps. Each movement carried the weight of her fury. She stopped in front of the guard who had spoken and stared into his eyes. He trembled like a child. "Heir does not steal children," she hissed, her voice low but filled with menace. "Someone dared to take what belongs to me. Someone hides them." The guard fell to his knees, begging for mercy, but the queen showed none. With one swift motion, she raised her hand, and the guard was dragged away by others, screaming. The soldiers knew his fate was sealed. The queen had no room for weakness. Outside the palace, the entire city was under lockdown. Soldiers patrolled the streets, scanning faces, searching every home. The skies were filled with hunter ships, their beams sweeping across the dark landscape. Loudspeakers announced the queen's command. "Anyone who hides the princesses will face death. Anyone who reports their location will be rewarded beyond measure." Fear spread like fire. Families locked their doors. Merchants shut down their shops. Even thieves and smugglers vanished into hiding. No one wanted to be caught in the queen's wrath. But whispers still spread in the shadows. Some claimed the daughters had been taken by rebels who wanted to weaken the throne. Others believed the queen's enemies from far-off star systems had used strange magic to spirit them away. One rumor, quiet and almost foolish, spoke of a human traveler seen wandering near the borders days ago. But who would dare believe that a simple human could outwit the queen's army? Back in the palace, the queen's fury only grew. She stood before a giant star map glowing in the air, her claws pointing at worlds across the galaxy. "Send ships here. Double the guards here. Search the mines, the markets, even the forests. Tear down every hiding place," she ordered. Her voice echoed like thunder. Generals rushed to obey, afraid to even breathe near her. The queen's rage was not only for her enemies, it was for herself as well. She had promised to protect her daughters with her life. She had sworn that nothing would ever harm them. And now, in a single night, they were gone. The thought stabbed at her heart like a blade. But instead of tears, she gave only rage. Rage was her shield, still. When she walked alone in the quiet of her chambers, her hands shook. She touched the crown on her head, heavy with jewels, and, for the first time in years, it felt meaningless. Without her daughters, even her empire felt hollow. The palace trembled under her roar once again. "I will find them. I will burn every world if I must. And when I find the one responsible, I will rip them apart with my own hands." Far beyond her reach, the two little princesses slept soundly, far away from the fire and fury of their mother. Their small bodies rested against the chest of a man who had no idea of the storm racing toward him. The queen believed she was chasing shadows. What she didn't know was that destiny was already moving against her, pulling her daughters into the arms of the one being she would never expect. A human. The city that feared the queen's wrath lay far behind, and in a small border town the night was peaceful, quiet, and almost forgotten by the empire. Here lived a man no one paid attention to. He was human, a traveler from a world that most aliens barely remembered. To the townsfolk, he was just another wanderer who did odd jobs for a few credits. But behind his calm face was a man who had seen too much, a man who preferred silence to attention. His days were simple. He carried crates for merchants at the market, fixed broken tools for farmers, and sometimes helped children learn to read the trade signs that flashed above the shops. He never asked for much in return, only enough to eat and rent his small hut on the edge of town. Some people wondered why a human lived here, so far from his own kind. But the man never explained. He would just smile, share bread with a hungry worker, or sit quietly in the corner of the tavern listening to the stories of others. That evening he had finished his work earlier than usual. The markets were closing. The air smelled of roasted grains, and the streets were glowing with faint lantern light. He gave a piece of fruit to a thin alien child who had been staring at him with hungry eyes. The child smiled, whispered a thank you, and ran off. The man watched, his heart softening, his heart. These small gestures meant more to him than gold. As darkness spread, he returned to his hut. The hut was small, built from wood and stone, with just one room. The bed was little more than a blanket over hay, but he never complained. He had lived in worse places before. He lit a single lamp, ate a small meal of bread and soup, and stretched out on the bed. The night was cool, the wind carried the scent of the river, and for once he felt at peace. But peace never lasted long in a galaxy ruled by the Queen. Sometime after midnight, the man stirred. He felt something unusual, a weight on his chest, soft and warm. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light of the lamp. At first he thought it was just a dream, but then his vision cleared and his breath caught in his throat. Two small figures were curled up on top of him. Their skin glowed faintly, their features delicate yet strange, their small breaths rising and falling in rhythm. They looked like children, but not human children. Their tiny horns glimmered faintly in the lamp's glow, and their hair shimmered as though woven with threads of silver. For a long moment, the man froze. His heart pounded. Who were these children? How had they entered his hut without a sound? He had locked the door, closed the windows, and yet here they were, sleeping against him as if they had known him forever. He reached out carefully, trying not to wake them. Their little hands were clutching his shirt tightly, as though they feared he would leave. One of them murmured something in her sleep, a word he didn't understand, but her tone was soft, almost trusting. The other shifted slightly, pressing her head closer against his chest. The man's confusion grew into unease. He had traveled across many worlds, and he knew danger often came in small, unexpected forms. He studied their faces again. They weren't ordinary children. Their clothes were fine silk, though torn and dirty from travel. Their small boots were made of rare leather, the kind used only by the noble or royal families of the empire. His chest grew cold as a possibility struck him. Could these be the daughters of the Queen? The ones whose disappearance had shaken the empire? The man lay back slowly, his thoughts racing. If this was true, then he was in more danger than he had ever faced before. The Queen's wrath was known across the stars. If her soldiers found him with her daughters, his life would end instantly. And yet, as he looked down at the children sleeping peacefully for the first time in who knew how long, he felt something else. An old, forgotten feeling of responsibility. He could not simply push them away. He could not wake them and send them back into the night. Whatever path had led them here, they had chosen him, and whether he liked it or not, he was now part of their story. The man sighed quietly, staring at the ceiling of his hut. "What have you brought me into?" he whispered to no one. The girls didn't answer. They only slept deeper, their breaths warm against him, unaware that their presence would soon draw the fury of the greatest queen in the galaxy straight to his doorstep. Morning light crept slowly into the small hut, soft and golden. Birds outside chirped weakly, and the river's gentle flow filled the silence. The human woke before the town stirred, as he always did. But today was not like other days. Today, his chest still felt the warmth of two small bodies resting against him. He blinked at the sight, hoping it was only a dream, but the vision stayed. The two little alien girls were curled tightly against him, as if his chest was the safest place in the galaxy. Their delicate horns glimmered faintly under the sunlight, slipping through the cracks in the wall. Their small hands clutched at his shirt even in sleep, unwilling to let go. For a long time, the man didn't move. His heart pounded, each beat louder than the last. He had seen many strange things in his life, but nothing like this. Two royal children, if they were truly who he feared, were lying on him as though they belonged there. The thought alone was enough to chill his blood. Slowly, carefully, he shifted his arm. One of the girls stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were bright and golden, just like the Queen's, but softer, filled with innocence. She looked at him without fear. Instead, she gave a small, tired smile and whispered something in her language. He couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. It was trust. The second girl woke next, stretching her small arms before settling back against his chest as though she had no intention of leaving. Both looked exhausted, as if they had traveled far. Their clothes were torn, their boots covered in dust, and their hair tangled with bits of leaves. Whoever they were, they hadn't simply wandered into town. Something, or someone, had driven them here. The human sat up slowly, lifting the girls so they rested on the blanket. He studied them with cautious eyes. Their features, their glow, their silk garments, it all pointed to one truth he didn't want to accept. They were no ordinary children. They were the missing princesses of the Empire, daughters of the most feared ruler in the galaxy. He stood, pacing the small room. His mind spun with questions. How had they come here? Why had they chosen his hut, of all places? And more importantly, what would happen when the queen discovered where they were? He rubbed his face with both hands. The answer was simple. If the soldiers found him with the princesses, he was a dead man. Yet when he glanced back at them, his heart softened. The girls were giggling now, pointing at the old wooden lamp in the corner, whispering to each other, in their own tongue. They looked so alive, so innocent, so untouched by the weight of their empire. They reminded him of something he had lost long ago: peace, family, and warmth. The younger one suddenly reached out to him, her hand open as though asking him to return. Without thinking, he stepped closer, and she grabbed his finger tightly. The small gesture pierced through his fear. These children didn't see him as a stranger. They saw him as safe. The human sat back down. He knew he had no choice. He couldn't send them away, not when they clung to him like this. He would protect them, at least until he understood what was happening. But he also knew the clock was ticking. The Queen's armies would not rest. They would search every town, every hut, and sooner or later they would come here. For the first time in years, the man felt the weight of destiny pressing on him. He had tried to live quietly, to hide from the galaxy's wars and rulers, but fate had found him again in the form of two small princesses curled up on his chest. And no matter how much he wished to remain invisible, he knew the Queen's shadow was already moving closer. Outside, the morning streets began to fill with voices. Merchants opened their stalls, workers carried tools, and children laughed as they chased each other. But none of them knew the storm that was coming. None of them knew that the most powerful ruler in the stars was about to descend upon their town. And inside the hut, the human sat silently, two alien princesses leaning against him, unaware that the bond forming between them would change not only his life, but the fate of the entire empire. The empire did not sleep. From the highest star fortresses to the smallest mining colonies, the order of the alien queen spread like fire through dry grass. Her daughters were missing, and her command was clear: find them, no matter the cost, across. Planet's soldiers stormed homes and markets, tearing through streets like hunters chasing prey. Families cowered as doors were kicked down. Even the loyal feared that a careless word might be twisted into treason. No one dared hide anything, for the Queen's wrath was a storm that spared no one. Yet despite the chaos, the trail of the missing princesses seemed to vanish into nothing. Scouts searched every transport ship, interrogated every traveler, and scanned every corner of the capital. The results were the same: nothing. The girls had disappeared like ghosts. For most, that mystery was terrifying. But for the Queen, it was infuriating. In her war chamber, the Queen stood before a table glowing with maps of stars and shifting energy lines. Her generals reported their findings with shaking voices. One finally dared to speak. "My Queen, our trackers have found faint traces near the southern borders. Energy residue, small but unusual. It may be from royal blood." The Queen's eyes narrowed. She leaned closer to the map, her claws hovering above the flashing signal. "And where does this trail lead?" she asked in a low, dangerous voice. The general hesitated before answering. "To a small trade town near the river colonies, far from the capital. A place of no importance, mostly travelers and workers. We do not know why the energy ends." "There," the Queen's lips curled into something between a snarl and a smile. "Then that is where they are," she declared. "Prepare my armies. If they are not found, the town will burn." As her fleet moved, the town remained unaware of the storm descending upon it. The human, however, began to feel uneasy. He had gone to the market that day, hoping to gather food for the girls, but the air felt different. People whispered in tight groups, their eyes darting toward the skies. Soldiers had been seen nearby, moving closer each day. Everyone knew something was wrong, though no one dared say what. The human bought bread and fruit quietly, returning to his hut. Inside, the princesses were waiting, their eyes lighting up when he walked in. They ran to him, hugging his legs, their laughter filling the small room. He forced a smile, though his mind was heavy. He knew the search would tighten soon, and when it did, they would have no place to hide. That night, as the girls slept, he sat near the window, staring at the distant stars. He thought about leaving, about slipping away into the forests before the soldiers came. But where could he take them? He had no ship, no safe house, no allies. He was only one man against the might of an empire. And yet, when he looked back at the two sleeping girls, he knew one thing for certain. He could not abandon them. Far above, the Queen's fleet broke through the atmosphere, black ships like shadows covering the skies. Their engines roared like thunder as they spread across the land. Beacons of light cut through the darkness, scanning the ground below. Panic spread in the town as people rushed indoors, hiding from the soldiers who marched in. The Queen herself stepped off her flagship, her armor gleaming under the torchlight of her guards. Her eyes burned as she scanned the horizon. "They are here," she said coldly. "I can feel it." The search narrowed to the small town, and the net was closing tighter with each hour. Every door would be checked, every shadow uncovered. The soldiers would not rest until the princesses were found, and in the quiet hut by the river, the human knew his time was running out. The faint laughter of the girls still echoed in his ears, but beyond the walls, the footsteps of soldiers were already marching closer. The hunter had arrived, and soon the hunted would be revealed. The town lived in fear as the Queen's soldiers spread through the streets. Every day, more patrols arrived. The sound of armored boots became as common as the bells of the marketplace. Families locked their doors, merchants kept their voices low, and no one dared to look a soldier in the eye. The Queen's presence was heavy in the air like a storm cloud that refused to move. Inside the human's hut, however, another world was unfolding. The two princesses, who had arrived in silence and fear, were slowly coming alive again. At first, they had been cautious, clinging to him as though the shadows outside would swallow them. But as the days passed, they began to laugh more, to play with scraps of wood he carved into little figures, and to smile at the simplest things. One morning he returned from the market with a basket of fruit. The younger princess squealed with joy, rushing to grab the bright red ones. She bit into it clumsily, juice dripping down her chin. The older one shook her head, trying to appear more proper, but soon she too was giggling, her sharp little teeth flashing as she ate. The human watched them quietly, a soft smile tugging at his lips. He had lived alone for so long, and yet in these small moments he felt something he thought was lost forever: warmth. But along with warmth came responsibility. Each time he saw their torn clothes and dirt-stained boots, his heart grew heavier. These were not children who could survive, on the run forever. They were royalty, chased by the empire itself, and yet here they were depending on him, a simple man with no power. He tried to tell himself he was only keeping them safe until he found a way to return them. Yet in truth, he already knew he would never willingly let them go. At night, when the girls curled against him to sleep, they whispered in their alien tongue. He didn't understand most of it, but sometimes the words were clear enough. The younger one called him safe. The older one, with eyes too wise for her age, once whispered a word that made his heart tighten: home. Still, danger crept closer with each passing hour. The human could hear soldiers marching through the town, kicking in doors, dragging out frightened civilians. They were searching everywhere, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they reached his hut. He started to prepare small hiding places, a loose panel under the floor, a space behind stacked crates. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The girls followed him curiously, their laughter softening his worry for brief moments. But he knew the truth. Sooner or later, soldiers would come. One evening, the older princess sat beside him as he sharpened a small knife. She studied him carefully, her golden eyes reflecting the flame of the lamp. "Afraid?" she asked in broken words of his language. The human froze. It was the first time she had spoken to him in his tongue. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he admitted. "Afraid." The girl tilted her head, then placed her small hand over his. "Strong," she whispered, her voice soft but certain. "You strong. We safe." The human swallowed hard, staring at the small hand on his own. For years he had lived as though nothing mattered, carrying only himself through the galaxy, but now these two children believed in him more than anyone ever had. That belief was dangerous, but it was also powerful. It made him sit taller, breathe deeper, and sharpen his resolve. Outside, the soldiers grew louder. The Queen's banners hung over the town square, her shadow stretching over every street. People whispered that she herself was coming soon. The net was closing, and when it did, no lie, no trick, and no hiding place would be enough. Inside the hut, the bond between the human and the alien princesses grew stronger. They no longer clung to him only out of fear. They clung to him because they chose him. And he, though unwilling at first, could no longer deny it. He was no longer just a man hiding children. He was their protector, their shield, their home, and as he looked into their glowing eyes, he knew one thing. If the Queen herself came for them, he would stand in her path no matter the cost. The town was no longer the same. Streets that once echoed with children's laughter now trembled under the heavy boots of soldiers. The Queen's banners hung from rooftops, their black and red symbols reminding everyone of her authority. People spoke in whispers, glancing nervously at the skies where her warships floated like dark birds of prey. Fear was everywhere. Inside the small hut by the river, the human kept watch. Every sound outside, the clank of armor, the barking of orders, the crying of neighbors, made his body tense. He had hidden the princesses in a secret space under the floor, a narrow gap he had carved open at night. It was uncomfortable, but safe enough to keep them out of sight. Each time he lifted the panel, their glowing eyes looked up at him with complete trust. That trust weighed heavily on his chest. The knock came sooner than expected. A sharp, hard pounding rattled the wooden door. The human's heart skipped. He moved quickly, pressing a finger to his lips as he lowered the panel back over the girls. The younger one whimpered softly, but he whispered, "Quiet," and she obeyed, clutching her sister's hand in the dark space below. The door swung open before he could even touch it. A soldier, tall and armored, stepped inside. His visor glowed, with scanning lights, and his clawed hand rested on the hilt of his weapon. "You there!" the soldier barked, his voice metallic. "We are searching every dwelling. The Queen's daughters have vanished. Speak. Have you seen anything unusual?" The human forced his face to stay calm. "I am only a worker," he said evenly. "I fix tools. I trade small things. Nothing unusual happens here." The soldier's eyes narrowed. He stepped deeper into the hut, scanning the walls, the table, the bed. His heavy boots thudded across the floor, right above the space where the girls hid. The human's chest tightened. He kept his arms at his sides, his breathing slow, but his pulse thundered in his ears. The soldier kicked at a crate, breaking. It opened. Strange energy was detected near this sector, he muttered. His glowing visor swept across the room again. Then his head tilted, as though he sensed something. He turned toward the bed, just a few feet from the hidden panel. At that moment, a faint sound slipped through, the younger princess shifting in her cramped space. It was soft, almost nothing, but the soldier's ears twitched. He spun, eyes glowing brighter. "What was that?" he demanded, stepping toward the bed, weapon half drawn. The human moved quickly. He stepped into the soldier's path, holding his hands out in a show of calm. "Rats," he said smoothly. "The floorboards are old. They creak. Nothing more." The soldier narrowed his eyes. His visor scanned the human, lingering on his heartbeat. The man forced his breath to stay even, his gaze steady. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then the soldier grunted and lowered his weapon. "If I discover you are lying," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "the Queen herself will rip the truth from your bones." With that, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. The heavy footsteps faded into the street, joining the march of others. The human let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands trembled slightly, but he clenched them into fists until the shaking stopped. He knelt quickly, pulling up the floor panel. The two princesses blinked up at him, their faces pale with fear. The younger one crawled out first, throwing her arms around his neck. "Safe," she whispered in her broken voice, her small body trembling. The older one followed, her golden eyes meeting his. She said nothing, but the way she held his hand spoke louder than words. She had seen death in that moment, and yet she believed he had protected them. The human hugged them both tightly, though his mind burned with dread. The soldiers were searching harder now, and they had come dangerously close. This was only the first encounter. Next time he might not be so lucky. Outside, the sound of horns echoed through the town. A new arrival had come. The human stepped to the window and saw a massive ship landing in the square, larger and darker than the rest. The soldiers fell to their knees as the ramp lowered, and from the shadows of the ship stepped the one figure he had prayed would never come, the queen herself,